Thank you for joining today. I'm going to be talking about movement in a series I'm doing, and today we're going to be focusing on the hinge, also known as bending. This is probably one of the more complicated movement patterns that I'm going to be doing in this series, and it's going to require a few practice drills that I'm going to give you at the end. So I'm going to break this down into three parts. Part one, we're going to talk about why we want to be focusing on perfecting some of these movements. Part two, we're going to be breaking down the hinge and bending as simply as I can put it. And part three, like I said, we're going to be focusing on a couple of drills that I want you to do, which will reveal to you where you potentially have your issues with this movement. The movement patterns that we have as humans, mostly as human adults, I should say, can get incorrectly adapted. We can lose the movement patterns. We can maladapt. We have issues with them. And so we want to practice those movement patterns so when we get on the track, when we get on the street and run, when we lift weights in the gym, when we swim in the pool, when we do all these things, those fundamental movement patterns are there, and then we can optimize our fitness and exercise. So that's the goal of this. Everyday tasks are affected as well. Your everyday tasks mimic basic exercises. And so those are known as functional or primal or basic movements. And so when you go to the grocery store, when you go to work, when you sit in the car, your movement patterns are going to be either incorrectly, you're going to be using your body incorrectly, set yourself up for potential issues, or you're going to be optimizing your movement patterns. So not only is your fitness and your training and your exercise better optimized, but just making it through life, making it from your car to the grocery store and back home without getting an injury, or making it from the kitchen sink to the freezer and lifting out something out of the freezer and not injuring your back. You're going to mitigate those risks by perfecting those movements. So also, if we don't move, if we live a sedentary life, we develop rust. Just like a car sitting in the junkyard, our bodies get rusty, and the rustiness of our bodies shows up as joint dysfunction, low back pain, neck pain, posture issues, degenerative joint disease, degenerative disc disease. Other issues arise as our bodies stiffen up, and other health challenges obviously present in other metabolic systems that don't necessarily relate to the body, but maybe our cardiovascular system, our endocrine system. Those systems can get rusty too if we're not moving our body and we're sedentary. So to stay rust free, we got to train. To train our bodies, we got to move. And to move our bodies, we have to optimize these 7 movement patterns. And they are squatting, lunging, pushing, pulling, hinge, which is what today's topic is, twist, and then walking. And then within those movements, there's a bunch of fine movements that you can work on and optimize, but that's going to be the goal of today. So let's talk about the hinge. Okay, so the hinge is, like I said, it's a classic movement. It's bending. So we do this every day, all day, whether you're an athlete or you're an office worker or you're a nurse or you're a chiropractor or you're a physical therapist or you're a construction worker, you bend all day long. Everyone does it all day long, thousands of times a day, maybe more. You're bending. It could be a slight bend to pick up something off the floor. It could be a slight bend to lean forward towards your computer to read something more closely. So bending is hinging, and most people do it incorrectly and place a lot of load on their low back. That's unneeded stress. When you're bending forward and you're placing that load on your low back, you're not doing it correctly, and it can set you up for injuries. So the movement pattern is also something that is extremely feared by patients when you talk about hinging. And usually it's not presented in the form of a hinge. Usually it's presented in the form of scary exercise word called a deadlift. And many people avoid deadlifts completely because they feel like it's way too risky to do a deadlift. And so we want to be able to do the hinge. We want to master the hinge, and it takes a little practice. And by mastering the hinge and doing it correctly, you can reduce your low back tweaks. So if you got that cyclical. Every couple months you kind of tweak your low back and then it hurts for a couple weeks or maybe longer, and you can barely kind of bend forward. That tightness, that stiffness, the dull pain, those flare-ups that occur cyclically, if you optimize your hinge, you can reduce that. And obviously that's near and dear to my heart, because that's my everyday clinical practice, people injuring themselves doing everyday activity. So the main muscles worked in any hinge exercise are your glutes, your hamstrings, and muscles in your back. So in the back, how much of the back is involved when you do the movement depends on the specific movement pattern. So there's different types of ways to hinge, obviously. There's different types of stances, different forms. When you look at the exercise, there's different exercises. For example, there's Romanian deadlifts, there's kettlebell swings, there's glute bridge, there's conventional deadlifts, and the list goes on and on. Those are all fall under the umbrella of being able to do a hinge. And from a practical standpoint, if you've ever had to reach in the back of the trunk of your car to grab something heavy, like a case of water, or you grab something maybe inside of a heavy object from inside of a bin or a case, you're going to have to hinge down, grab that object and pull it up. And so these you can't get away from doing these exercises, these movements. So that's why we want to be optimizing our movement patterns, so we can be healthy and train and optimize our physical body. The hinge is probably one of the more complicated movement patterns that we have to deal with out of all of them, I would say, because it's a movement pattern. It's not just moving your arm, it's moving your whole body, and you have to train it. And so let's talk about how to test your hinge, and then 3 drills that you're going to have to be practicing over the next couple weeks. And then next time we check in, I would love to hear how it's going. So here's how to test yourself. You're going to need to hold something heavy in your arms. It could be a weighted bar, or it could be dumbbells. And most people don't have a weighted bar or an Olympic bar in their home. So you're going to have to find dumbbells, kettlebells, or 2 heavy objects that are the same weight, and hold them in your hands. That's step 1. Again, this is testing yourself. Step 2, your feet should be wider than your shoulders a little bit, and that's a good place to be. As you hinge forward from your hips, your back needs to be straight. As you lower the weight, I want you to stand with the weight in your arms. You're going to be bending at your waist, at your hips, and you're going to be slowly lowering the weight towards the floor. You don't need to go all the way to the floor. And depending on who you are, what your past history of injuries are, the status of how tight your low back is, those types of things, you may not be able to go down very far. So you're going to be slowly lowering that weight towards the floor. And you do not want to do this with straight legs. Your knees need to be slightly bent. I would say anywhere from 10 to 20 degrees. And that's going to give you the opportunity for your glute muscles to work and to support your pelvis and your spine. If you don't feel like you're firing your glutes, maybe your knees aren't bent enough. I see that a lot. So make sure your knees are slightly bent going into this movement, and you want to feel like you're squeezing your glutes. And so that's the test. Again, I'm gonna repeat that. You're gonna hold weight. Ideally, you're gonna hold a lighter, but I would say 2 to 5 pounds in your hands. You're gonna stand with your feet shoulder width apart. Your knees are gonna be slightly bent, 10 to 20 degrees, and then you're gonna keep your back straight as you lower that weight towards the ground, and then you're gonna pull it back up. That's your test, okay? That's not necessarily how you train this exercise. That's going to reveal potential issues, and everyone's going to have different issues. Ankle mobility, knee mobility, hip mobility. Maybe you're using too much low back. You shouldn't be using low back. That kind of stuff's going to show up. So then we want to train the exercise for a couple weeks, and then you're going to retest it using weight. And then if you optimize it, you can train this exercise. So here's drill number 1. Okay, so drill number 1 is where you're going to just be doing this movement pattern without any weight, okay? So you're going to stand a few inches from the wall. You're going to stand with your back towards the wall, okay? So a few inches from the wall. You're going to start with your knees slightly soft, kind of easy, like kind of that ready athletic position, slightly bent, and you're going to you want to go into the hinge and tap your rear end against the wall, okay? It's a butt tap. So again, you're going to stand a few inches from the wall. Knees are going to be slightly bent, kind of soft, back straight. You're going to go into the bend motion or the hinge motion with your back straight, and you're going to tap your rear end against the wall, and then you're going to stand back up. As you progress this movement with this one, you're going to step forward from, like, it's going to be super easy with being an inch or two away from the wall, but as you step forward 6 inches, maybe a foot away from the wall, it's going to be increasingly difficult to keep your back straight, to not bend your knees. You want to keep, like I said, you want your knees to be bent, but you don't want to be bending your knees through this motion. And then you're going to tap your bum against the wall. So you're going to repeat that as part of this drill once a day. I would do it, 10 to 15 times to really solidify this movement pattern. So that's drill number 1, the butt taps. So drill number 2, the goal here is to minimize the movement of your knee. So you're going to find a bench, a stool, a chair, and the seat bucket of a chair, not the back of a chair. And you're going to stand 2 inches in front of that chair. And you're going to do the same thing. Knees going to be soft, slightly bent. Your back, keep it straight for the whole movement, and you're going to go into the hinge. You're going to bend at the hips, bend at the waist. And you don't want your knees to come forward and touch the chair. They have to stay where they are as you're going through this movement, and then you stand back straight up. The deeper you can go, the lower you can go, the more you can bend at your hips without your knees touching the chair, the better. So that's drill number 2. And again, you don't need to walk away from the chair as you do this. You just need to try and go deep without your knees touching the chair. So that's drill number 2. Drill number 3 is probably the hardest drill, so I'll save this one for last. Drill number 3 is and you can mix and match this. You can do this out of order, it's fine. But drill number 3 is going to be training your ability to keep your back straight while you go through the hinge movement. And so you're going to need a long stick, a long pole, like a broomstick. That's perfect. Okay, so this broomstick is going to be placed along your spine. Okay, so it's going to travel right in the middle of your back, straight up and down your spine. You need 3 points of contact. Point number 1 is the back of your head. So your broomstick on your back, touching the back of your head. The next point of contact is your mid-back. And then the last point in contact is your sacrum. So the right below your belt, that's your sacrum bone. Okay, and you need it right there. So then you're going to be going through the motion of doing a hip hinge. Okay, and as you bend and lean forward, you want to keep that broomstick or that pole on those 3 points of contact through the motion. You may not be able to go very far before it starts to deviate and come off. Maybe your head comes forward, maybe your back rounds out, or maybe you can't keep it on your sacrum. And that's where you stop. That's where you figure out, okay, what's the issue here? Where am I tight? And everyone's going to, like I said, is going to be a little bit different. And then you're going to stand back up, and then you're going to practice that motion. Every time you want to push yourself to try and get a little bit deeper, while keeping that point of contact on your back. So like I said, anytime the broomstick loses contact, the exercise, the movement is over. Stand back up, try again. And those are the 3 drills. So the ultimate drill, obviously, is to combine all 3. So you put a broomstick on your back, you stand pretty close to a wall, facing away from a wall, and then you put a chair or a bench or something to block your knee movement in front of you, and then you go through a hip hinge. And again, you're bending at the hips. That's where the hinge takes place, and you're bending forward, going through that bend motion, and you stand back up, and that's how you master it. And the human body does really well if you practice these things slowly and you repeat them. So we're not talking about lifting weights here. We're not talking about training this as an exercise. We're just trying to master this movement pattern.